Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Welcome back, everyone, to Untangling Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Today, we get to have one of my first, which is a recording with two very lovely and very brilliant people in the mental health field. So I want to start out with the disclaimer of that this is not a substitute for a therapeutic relationship. I strongly recommend that you seek a therapist that is in your area that can speak about your unique situation. So that being said, let's go ahead and get into our topic today, which I have these lovely, brilliant people here to talk about with. Now, if you've listened to the recording before this, then you'd have heard about one of my interviewees, Boonie. But today we have Lorran Garrison as well.
Lorran Garrison.
Sorry, Lorran Garrison. It's my dyslexia kicking in again.
That's all right.
Trying to get the names and get the audio. I do better with audio than I do with reading names. So, Lorran Garrison. So, Boonie is a therapist who's been trained by the
No, I'm not.
Oh, I'm just blowing it all today. Oh, okay. So, Boonie is trained at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. What about for you, Lorran?
Lorraine.
Lorraine.
Just remember me like Quiche Lorraine or Sweet Lorraine. Do you like jazz? Because like Sweet Lorraine is one of my favorite jazz songs. So
Gotcha.
Anyways.
But I do enjoy eating quiche, so.
So there you go, right?
Yeah.
You'll remember me that way.
Yeah, so why don't you give us a little of your backstory and how you found yourself here and being interviewed as I keep making these screw-ups.
It's all right. It's all right. You know, we're not perfect. That's why we go into therapy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my name is Lorran Garrison. I am from the island of Guam. I am a school psychologist here in San Diego. I work in a school district. I primarily work in the high school area right now. I am also an author on social emotional learning books that you can find on Amazon. Brain Boy and Bob go on different adventures. My favorite one right now is Brain Boy and Bob have first day of school jitters. So once again, you can look me up. My first name is spelled kind of funny. Based on my background, I was raised by an African-American father and a Vietnamese mother, but ethnically I am half Filipino and half Vietnamese that, like I said, grew up on an island. So I have a mixture background of cultural ethnicities in my family. Once again, my name is spelled Lorran, but it's pronounced Lorraine, or if you are French, you could say Lorran, how it's spelled, and the last name is Garrison.
Gotcha. So you two work together often, because I've seen on your informational page that you've given both conferences and many times. So I'm just going to let you guys go here. So I know we were just in our previous recording, Boonie and I were talking much more about neurodiversity and gaming and the API identity. So I'm wondering, what's your take on it? And please bounce off of each other. Let me be a fly on the wall.
Oh, you're welcome to have this conversation. So we just recently spoke at the California Association of School Psychologists here in Southern California. And what we were talking about how to be better allies, how to have better allyship. And we were really focusing around the BIPOC experience and why are we pulling out Black? Why are we pulling out Indigenous from the people of color experience? And as you've noticed in the last couple of days, I would just say like last week, there was a math teacher at UC Riverside who was doing this crazy, oh my God. I mean, like, okay, so this is recording in October. So this happened October 23rd-ish, okay? So this teacher is doing a tomahawk dance, and she's trying to get her students to know some sort of formula for math. I think it's some sort of cosine, sine, something I can't remember. And and so other people were writing on social media, it's the trigonometry to remember something Sakatoa, right? So, but she went around and she was pretending she was like worshiping some rock god and bumping her toe. And so a Native American person who has a Native American name, first name, last name, recorded this because they felt like they were going to be violated from their culture. And so those are the last conversations I've been having, like the last couple of days, the last couple of weeks, about colonialism, and about how, as therapists of people of color, as therapists, we need to take back all the things that were taken away from us, like meditation, yoga. I mean, all of these things, peyote. I mean, like, Native American spiritual retreats of the sweat lodge and things like that. So that has been on my mind recently, about how, there are these barriers to get the education, to get the PhD, the PsyDs, whatever mental health therapists, that Western culture. But then, our cultures are being used for, like I said, the alternative medicines and things like that. So that's been on my mind. Boonie, I know you have a lot to say about this.
Yeah, I want to say my piece a little bit.
Please do.
So I come from a background of energy healing. My grandfather was an honorary monk and spiritual leader for our family and our temple. He led prayer with the monks. And so I thought it was freaking cool. Every time we would go to temple, instead of the monks leading prayer or chanting, they'd get him to lead. And that was such an honor. It was such like a cool relationship I have to spirituality as well. Like, damn, that's so freaking awesome. My grandpa's the one doing it. Out of all the people here, he's the one. And so I think that, the belief and the embodying of spiritual energy healing, I've inherited as well. And I believe in it so much. And yet I've had this inability to reclaim the practice, because I feel that layer of imposter syndrome and anger, because it keeps on becoming colonized and robbed from whoever has claimed it part of their culture. And I will reframe it or explain further, where, let's say in the 70s or 60s, there was this movement towards mindfulness and meditation. But before that happened, Western practitioners made fun of us for meditating. They called us savages or primal. And they said, this is not nearly a good way of healing. No way is it a legit way of healing. So we're being dehumanized for our practices. When white people go to India for some spiritual awakening, they will come back learning yoga for free, or they'll go to a temple, study Buddhism, become a monk for like a week or something, and they feel so much better. They're transcendent. And so you're taking all this labor and history from people of color, all these spiritual ancestral healing practices from other cultures, and now it's become commodified and whitewashed. So you see all these people doing yoga, something yoga, X yoga, beer yoga, donkey yoga, cat yoga, whatever you call it. And it's becoming stripped of its meaning. It's becoming very like a gimmick, and people have robbed the sanctity of so much that even though it's being taken now into somatic experiencing practices, I know personally there's some work I have to do, but like this is my initial long-term reaction to embodying yoga or any type of meditative practice that has originally been part of my culture. Even though Western medicine finally has numbers and empirical evidence to say that it works, but before that, you're gonna dismiss and minimize a whole community of people because there's no numbers yet. But we've been doing it for generations, like thousands of years. So that's my take on it.
Thank you, Boonie. I mean, like, that's powerful. I mean, you know, and that's exactly what we were talking about with the school psychologist, right? So we were talking about implicit and explicit bias. What's the difference? What's microaggression? And so people don't notice that this is part of their microaggressions, right? So you know, explicit bias, that's like easy. Explicit bias is like, no, you got your racist uncle who says the N word, and you know, you got to call him out during dinner because you know that's not right, right? So that's difficult. We understand that. I get that. You know, to confront racism on its head, you know, that's difficult. I get it. And everyone knows that we need to be allies. We need to be stronger than that. We need to call out people. But now what we're asking to dig deeper. We're asking to dig deeper and do some self-reflection and look at that implicit bias, right? So full disclosure here, my husband's white, right? And so, you know, there's oftentimes I have to call out his privilege and I have to tell him like, look, honey, you know, you're doing some extra labor here that some folks don't want. And I'll give an example. We were at a public hot tub, you know, in our community yesterday, and, a couple of people joined us, you know, and one young Black man came and joined us and we had a great conversation. And poor Justin wanted to bond, but he was awkward and didn't know how to do it. And so he started talking about all the work that he did. And I was like, you know, and I started to like nudge him because he started talking about like, you know, he started to center himself. And what we mean by centering is making this movement about him. So we worked on a project last summer about the women's suffrage movement. And as we were working on it with his students, because my husband's a drama teacher, we found out that there was a huge fraction in the women's suffrage movement. Half of them were racist and the other half weren't, right? So he started talking about that and he started centering himself. And I was like, oh, this young Black man probably didn't want to hear about it. and so, you know, I was like, so, you know, he got the hint. He saw me like get a little nervous and he understood like, you know, you might want to bond with a person right now, but he might not want to bond with you. So we're all learning. We're all learning. You know, but we have to like talk about these things and and be like aware of it. Like we have to have that self-reflection. Otherwise, we're going to be constantly taking from each other all the time. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. And in many ways, I would also draw the parallel as you talk about the explicit and implicit bias. It's much like what we're already dealing here with the aspect of physical health versus mental health, is that physical health can be very explicit.
Yes.
Mental health is implicit. Mental health is invisible. In many cases, can be invisible.
Right.
So much of what we practice in the present constructs of therapy is based off the idea. So much of it grew out of biological medicine, which grew out of the standpoint of if we see it bleeding, we know that there's something going on there. Versus, like Boonie was saying during her recording, is that if this kid is having a tantrum in the middle of the classroom, this is a physical representation of something that's going on mentally at home. This is your bleeding wound, not just the fact that it's actually a gusher or that you need to put a bandage on it. It's the implicit bias.
Yes, it is the implicit bias. And that's what we were talking about too. And I will continuously talk about this, is that to be a better ally, you have to look at that implicit bias. You have to do that self-reflection, and it's hard. Not a lot of people can do that or willing to look at that. We're not saying that all white people are bad people and that they're terrible, you know, their ancestors are terrible and et cetera, et cetera. We're just asking folks, like, if you know better, then let's just try and do better. That's all. That's all. We make mistakes. You know, we're human. Like, you know, I can say some dumb things like, you know, like I realize for myself that I might have some implicit bias myself, especially with people who are larger than me, like I've always been tiny, and I just, and I, growing up in a culture of in a Vietnamese culture, the way they tell you that they care about you is, have you eaten yet? Right. So food is a very big thing in the Vietnamese culture. They don't say, I love you. They don't, they're not very big on that, but they'll say, have you eaten it? Are you well? That's how they say, how are you? But then there's the having the stigma of being fat, right? So you've got the mixture of the Western culture of you have to be thin. And then, but you also have this old Confucius energy from culturally, like if you were fat, then that meant you were wealthy. So there's that duality that we have as well in this, at least, I can speak for Vietnamese American culture that we have that duality. But like I said, if we know better, we just have to do better. Like looking in ourselves and how do we feel about that? And are we looking at that other person in front of us as a human being, or do we see a stereotype?
And it's very similar in the African American Black culture as well. What about for you, Boonie?
So I wanted to take a note on like the part about the external and the internal, which in terms of mental health, I think that's very different in terms of shame and the Asian culture too, right? Collectivist culture, because we were taught to not speak out on it. Emotional pain is a sign of weakness. It looks shameful for your entire ancestral line. Your lineage will be shamed if you have mental health concerns. So you guys kind of have to suck it up and push through. That's a sign of being strong. And so a huge thing that I've seen in terms of my own family system, as well as other Asians in the groups that I'm in, is like we somaticize a lot. So we're allowed to talk about physical pain. So it's, again, it goes back to chakra work. It's a physical manifestation of your mental wellness. Like heartbreak could literally hurt your chest. Having an ability to speak your truth could really have an inability to speak. Of course, there's not correlation or causation, and yet there's certain nuances of when our emotional, spiritual well-being is attacked or in pain that we need to check in with our bodies. And so there's this layer of how the explicit, again, is a sign of the implicit of what's going on inside of us. And I think that if we could reframe it for your Asian clients, collectivist clients who are not comfortable with talking about how I feel, again, because this is actually, I was mentored by a psychologist when I started in my program, and she taught me something very powerful, because when I spoke to her, I kept on saying sentences like, we don't do this, we do this. I kept on referencing myself as a collective. I didn't have a voice. I didn't have an identity to speak in terms of I. It was so hard, and she kept on checking me. So there was this clash of collectivist, individualist language and identity that I didn't understand. That was a very reflexive thing to do. And I was like, oh, I guess I really do attach myself to a collective, to the point where I talk about we, where I don't have an identity yet. So part of my growth in hybridity is understanding who I am and practicing speaking my truth. And that's a very difficult thing for depending how acculturated you are.
I think that's a brilliant place for us to take a moment and pause. And we'll be back with Boonie and Lorran.
Yes.
Oh, no. Yes. I'll get it. It just takes me a bunch of reputations. As we here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered.
Become our friend on Facebook. Post your thoughts about our shows and network on our timeline. Visit facebook.com/Voice America.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it, so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information.
Have you friended us on Facebook yet? Why not? Just go to facebook.com/Voice America or search for the keywords Voice America. Once you are part of our Facebook network, you'll receive daily messages about what's happening with our shows, this week's featured guests, and new happenings at the Voice America Talk Radio Network. And you can add your voice to the always active discussions on our timeline. Just go to facebook.com/Voice America or search for Voice America.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingnotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingnotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Welcome back, everyone, to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. We're here talking with Boonie and Lorran, who are these very brilliant and smart and intelligent women of API ancestry, which I honor and thank for being here, and who are also, all three of us are members of the Geek of Therapy group on Facebook. So one of the things that we were just sort of talking about, which we had spoken briefly in Boonie's, but also we get to have Lorraine's input on, is code switching and masking. Now, for those who aren't familiar, code switching is the aspect of we change either the way we speak, or our physical posture, or our indications, depending on who's around us. Equally, the masking is that aspect of we change the way we behave or what we might hold back, depending on who's around us. So where would you guys like to start there?
Oh my gosh. Yes. So, so let's talk about code switching because people are more familiar with code switching. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And we're not talking about the NPR program.
No, we're not. But that's a really good program too.
I know. I listen to it too.
Yeah. Okay. So code switching, I often had to do this as a kid growing up because one, I grew up on an island. So I grew up on Guam. Two, I grew up in a Black Vietnamese household. But ethnically, I'm also Filipino. So, and then as I got older, I learned Spanish because, Spanish is just the most widely used language after English, right? Here in the United States. So code switching for me, like going from my Black family to my Vietnamese family, I always had to make sure that I was doing things correctly and making sure that I was honoring my Vietnamese side when I was at my Vietnamese family, like making sure like my elders ate first, making sure I took off my shoes, those kind of things, as opposed to my Black family's house where everyone's loud and, everyone can do anything and you just like kind of jump in, right? So culturally, I had to code switch. So on that aspect, but masking, so I hit two kinds of categories. So not only ethnically am I, mixed, but I feel I belong also in the neurodiverse community where, I might be having an anxiety attack and melting down about something, but then I still have to present either at a panel or in front of parents during an IEP meeting. So I have to mask that who I am, or, I have to mask and pretend that I'm somebody else if I'm, sleeping in, I don't know, crunchy sheets or something, something like that.
Okay. Crunchy sheets.
Well, the sensory element, which is the thing. Yeah. Well,
can you not?
But and that's one of the realities of dealing with neurodiversity is there's a sensory component.
There is.
And
I could not sleep until 3 a.m. because of the freaking crunchy sheets. She's making fun of me.
I'm not making fun of you. I have issues with crunchy sheets too.
The light wouldn't stop going on. I was like, the universe has an agenda against me tonight.
We shared a hotel room when we went to the California Association of School Psychologists, and so our sensory was overloaded.
Yeah, so you're having the sensory with the sheets, which shows up for people's clothing, which is why you'll find that for some people who are either on the spectrum or dealing with, there's certain clothing type that you will always see them in because it is not irritating them. Or classically, food. We often talk about whether it's the 5 senses of bitter, sweet, tangy, and umami, but also not forgetting there's a texture. There is, till this day, I have a trouble drinking, say, like chocolate milk because I could always sense this graininess in the chocolate milk. So I always avoided having chocolate milk. It was very hard for me to have, say, ice cream that was chocolate, because I could always sense this
grittiness.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah.
And so that's in that standpoint of difficulty with food. And then we add that not only in the school environment, then we add it into the cultural environment. Why don't you particularly like this thing that has been cooked in our family for centuries, but you've got a problem with it?
Why are you so special? Yeah. Yep. I get that.
No one's allowed to be special.
But that goes very much into what you're saying about the collective culture. Right. To be special means you're not part of the collective.
Yep. So anyways, code switching and masking, they almost go hand in hand, because being a person of color, being an Asian person of color, I've been welcomed into spaces where Black people, even though folks don't know my background, that, I was raised by a Black father in a Black family. People don't know my background, but because of my Asian privilege, I have been privy to some, folks is what they say, and so like I have to mask, right? So, I have to pretend that to protect myself. I have to pretend that, no, I'm not Black. I don't come from a Black family. I have to pretend that, accept me for who you are, because, what you're saying is not right. And so then they'll turn an attack on me. So sometimes, as a person of color, you have to mask in order to protect yourself. Same thing if you are neurodiverse. I'll give an example. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. There was an autistic man who got shot. His caregivers and himself got shot and killed at Costco because he wasn't able to communicate that all he wanted was a sample. But so he pushed an off-duty cop who was carrying his 4-year-old daughter in his arms or something like that. And the off-duty cop felt threatened and shot this autistic nonverbal man. So that's the other thing I like to talk about, is that, as a person of color, as a person who's neurodiverse, sometimes masking is important in order to be safe, because the world does not know who we are as human beings just quite yet. We're not there yet. So, unfortunately, we kind of have to blend in. We have to like walk the walk and talk the talk in order to be safe.
Very true. And that's an exhausting place to be. And just imagine the amount of energy that takes up, which then also means certain social cues aren't going to be noticed, because guess what? That energy is gone trying to just keep ourselves safe.
And that's the argument with autism in Black. The creator, she is a proponent of ABA, and in the autistic community, most people are against it. And so she keeps on having to prove the argument of, well, for your Black autistic people, we don't have the luxury of having a service or support that humanizes us just yet. We are seen as a threat just when we're born. Our babies are perceived as threats way before they can even really walk. So we have to mask a little bit more, which is such a pain to utter. It's hard to talk about. So again, there's this layer of who we allow to reclaim their identity and become fully human, and others who have to keep on waiting in between this realm of dehumanizing myself to fit in, minimizing my voice because of safety reasons, and just it's so sad.
And as we said during your recording, is the face of autism is white. I know I have worked in the past as a tech aide for dealing with autistic kids as well. And one of the consistent things I kept seeing as I was looking at this, as I'm working on getting my master's degree in psychology, is that it's great that we're teaching them how to use their words to speak and get what they need. But we also need to teach them how to deal with people who are going to be assholes.
Yes.
Because it's those moments when those people, for whatever reasons within themselves, push that barrier is when they react. And then we have, sadly, moments like what you just said happen at Costco. Now, not that that was one where someone was purposely being a jerk, but that sense of we teach them to use their words and get response, but what's the plan B when the words aren't working?
Mm-hmm. And that actually makes me think of like, I will just blanket all of us. We're vulnerable populations. People think that we are the threat to society. We're the threat to other safety. We are the ones who are vulnerable. We are the ones who are oppressed. We are the ones who are taken advantage of and don't have the power to do what other people do so freely. So we are vulnerable. We're the ones who live with the threat of harm.
It makes me think of Elijah McClain in Colorado.
Very much so.
Very much so. He was non-threatening. His last words were non-threatening, but because he was Black and neurodivergent, he suffered, and it, I think about him all the time. Every time I come up and I talk, I'm talking for him.
Well, it's also because as you're saying that, the thought that popped in my head, referencing one of the other franchises that I often follow, Stargate SG1. One of the particular episodes, I think it was like season 3 or 4, they end up going to one of the worlds that built the Stargate, and they have this very, very natural, it seems like they're a childlike race. It turns out they're far older than everybody else, and they can manipulate the stargates with just a click of the finger. But they say one of their goals as representing the humans is that we protect those that are weaker than us. And yet, in this case, like what you just said with Elijah, the complete opposite of that. There are so many things here where we're not protecting the most vulnerable of us.
And I'm going to bring in, religious moments here about that. We have lots of folks who claim to be Christian, claim to, hold the word of Jesus Christ. But we're not protecting the weakest. And so that's what I'm asking folks to do. As I said in the last half of in our previous half of our segment, if we know better, we need to do better. And that's part of that, looking at our implicit bias, right? And bringing back to that implicit bias, look and do that self-reflection, care for each other, care for yourself, care for each other. And if we can't do that, then honestly, how can we call ourselves human? Honestly, what makes us any different than, being the rat scurrying around in, New York subway sewers?
Or what Agent Smith said in the first Matrix movie, humans are viruses.
Yep. So we're coming of an age and a time of, we are evolving as a society, as a world. And there's going to be folks that are going to be left behind and don't want to teach about critical race theory, or, are ashamed that they might have been that grandparent who, yelled at Ruby Ridges. I mean, Ruby Ridges, the first little girl that integrated in, who had to be protected by these big white men to go into, the desegregated classrooms. I mean, she's only 60 years old. It's 2021. She's only 60 years old. It wasn't that too long ago. It wasn't that too long ago. So when people tell me, why are you harping on the past about racism and blah, 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 colored only was only in the 1960s, loving versus Virginia, where Black and white folks and, those were illegal marriage that ended in 1968. It
hasn't been 100 years.
It hasn't been 100 years. The last person who got lynched was in the 80s,
that we publicly know. Exactly. I mean, look at Ahmaud Arbery. I'm saying his name wrong. I'm so sorry. Ahmaud Arbery.
Ahmaud Arbery. Thank you. You know, I mean, look at that. I mean, like, you know, people wonder why the Black culture is afraid of dogs and afraid of all of these things. So I could tell you, you know, like I could tell you that they were experimented on. I mean, the gynecologist who did C-sections and things like that experimented all on slaves. I mean, oh, so what? Am I born with critical race theory? No. I mean, I had to learn this. I had to go and pick up the books, and I had to read about it. I had to learn about the Vietnam War, not because I'm half Vietnamese and I was inherently born with it. I had to learn about it in college. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox now.
Well, I think that you illustrate what we have to do for one another. We have our own layers of being our own allies, you know? And it's just like, people have this perception that we're pitted against each other, because when I think about it, I remember, you know, the LA riots. I remember that tension.
Which ones?
She's too young for Watts, so, you know.
Right, but that was in LA, so it's like, which one are we talking about?
Right, the tension between the Korean community and the African American community, right? So that's a reference point, and we have to heal from that. You know, we were pit against each other because we were faced with shaping an ideal East Asian model minority identity, and yet I come from the Thai culture where we're freaking poor and we're kind of chunked in together with 2 billion Asians, which doesn't even make sense. And yet the demographic and certain cultural nuances get paired on kind of bloom on top of us, which gets pitted against systemic intergenerational harm that has been done to African American people, like, but then people use that to promote what we call the American dream, right? And so because of that knowledge, like Lorraine said, we have to do the work, we have to do the research, we have to be allies for each other, because those stereotypes have been used for us to promote someone else's agenda. We've been used for way too long, and it's up to us to figure that out and speak up against it and really do the effort to change, you know, individually.
Very much so.
There's no such thing as a model minority. I mean, that was an old, outdated word that was used in a news article in 1968, trying to pit, you know, Asian Americans against the Black culture. I mean, and that's a load of crap. Like, you know, I'm not that good at math. Don't ask me to do your math homework. No. You know. So yeah, we've got to support each other. Like it's intentional. It's us versus them, right? That's the intent. So when did, I mean, and it's parallel to historical, cultural nuances. Like, when did Jewish people become white? When did the Italians become white? When did the Irish people become white? You know, it was during the Jim Crow laws. So that's what it has been. And, you know, so now that we have the education, now we know it, now that the Wizard of Oz has been revealed, the man behind the curtain, right? Now that we know that, it's like, why do, you know, why follow that? Why not support each other? And as Mary Church Tyrrell said, a Black woman suffrage, you know, we lift as we rise. That's what we need to do. We lift each other, you know, as we rise. We break that glass ceiling, and we bring the people with us, you know. So there's no need for the fighting amongst, you know, people of color. I mean, we see it within ourselves. It's true. Like, even like we try to, even in Asian cultures, we have all these whitening creams, but that's like the history of colonialism, right? You know, we have one of those YouTubers who wants to look like one of our BTS guys. You know, not all Koreans look like, you know, the folks, our favorite boy band, BTS.
Or
V, I love you, V. If you're listening, I love you. I love you.
RM's my guy.
well, and if they're not doing that, they're trying to be the characters on the Squid Game.
That's the only representation that we have, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
So what you mentioned was like, since we have this proximity to whiteness and the model minority myth is so immersed into the culture, we can use that to our benefit to speak up, because somehow when we say it is not as dangerous or threatening. So we can use that message to really change the system. And I value and accept that responsibility, because again, we live in this world together. We're not separate.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm happy to use my privilege. I'm happy to use my privilege to support the Black community, the Indigenous community, all the missing women, all the missing Indigenous women. I'm happy to use my privilege. Absolutely.
Well, with that note, it's time for us to be wrapping up. And we're definitely going to do it this way. We're definitely going to be doing a recording with you, Lorran, so that we definitely can have more of a conversation of this, and to have maybe another part 2 with all of us, 3 of us together. But for right now, where can they find you if they wanted to check in with you and find your book?
You can find my book on Amazon. Little Brain Boy and the Very Hungry Maggot was our first one. And once again, my name is spelled Lorran. Last name is Garrison. Or you can go on www.littlebrainstorm.com.
What about for you, Boonie?
You can find me at organizedmesses.com or on YouTube and Instagram. My handles are again Organized Messes.
All righty. So this has been Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. And tune in again for one of our next ones. And we're going to have a continued lively conversation and deal with being our imperfect selves.
Authentic imperfect selves. That's it.
So you guys have fun today.
Oh, yes.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.